A 20-year-old girl who had never won a single Grand Slam match in her life filled a train with people who had never watched tennis in their life. If that sentence doesn't make sense to you yet, stay until the end, because by the time this video is over, you are going to understand something about crowds, about waiting, and about one word in Tagalog that explains all of it. Before we go further, I need you to sit with one question, because I am not going to answer it right away. How does an unseeded player, ranked outside the world's top 70, with 0 prior Grand Slam wins to her name, get an entire diaspora to organize itself around her before she has even walked onto the court? Keep that question in your chest. We are going to come back to it more than once, and the answer is not what you think. If you want more videos that dig underneath the score line, into the why nobody else is asking, subscribe now, because there is a very real chance we will never get another moment quite like this one again, and I don't want you to miss the next one. This channel exists for exactly this kind of story, so if it moved you even a little, hit subscribe before you keep watching. It genuinely helps this story reach the people it's actually about. Now let's go to Queens. Start on 69th Street in Woodside, where the bakeries sell pandesal warm in the early morning and the elevated 7 train rattles overhead every few minutes on its way toward Flushing. This stretch of Woodside has been known as Little Manila for decades, home to one of the most concentrated Filipino communities on the East Coast. On the morning of August 24, 2025, the 7 train leaving this corner is not carrying the usual mix of commuters and baseball fans. It is carrying a Filipino community heading to a U.S. Open main draw match, to watch a Filipino player. Her name is Alex Eala. She is 20 years old. She is unseeded. And in a few hours, she will walk onto a Grand Slam court to face the 14th seed in the world. Here is where most videos about her would stop and just tell you her resume. Trained since she was 13 at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Spain. Earlier that year, at the Miami Open, she beat world number 2 Iga Swiatek and reached her first WTA 1000 semifinal, becoming the first Filipina ever to do it. In June, she reached her first WTA Tour final at Eastbourne, losing a heartbreaking third-set tiebreak. That resume is true. It is also, in a way, the shallow version of this story, because it treats the crowd as something her wins produced. Win enough, and the fans come. Clean, simple, and wrong. Because if you actually stand on that corner in Woodside and watch who is boarding that train, the resume stops explaining anything. You see grandmothers who could not have named a single WTA player a year earlier. You see nurses coming off overnight hospital shifts, still in scrubs under Philippine flag jerseys. You see teenagers born in New Jersey whose parents were born thousands of miles away. These are not tennis fans who discovered Alex Eala. These are Filipino Americans who were already here, in Queens, in Jersey City, in Bergen County, and something about this one Sunday made an enormous number of them decide, independently, to be in the same place at the same time. That is not a fan base behaving normally. And once you notice that, 3 things stop making sense, and I want to walk you through all 3, because together they are the whole story. The first strange thing, before this Sunday, Alex Eala had never played a U.S. Open main draw match. 0 prior appearances in the main event of a Grand Slam on this court. And yet across the entire 2025 season, Miami, Eastbourne, Wimbledon, broadcast cameras kept finding the same thing in the stands. Groups in Philippine flag colors. Homemade signs in Tagalog. The kind of organized, traveling section most players don't accumulate until years after their breakthrough. So how does a player build a cross-continental following before her first Grand Slam win? The second strange thing, she was unseeded. Under normal tennis logic, an unseeded first-round match gets an outer court and a modest crowd. Instead, Filipino community pages across New York and New Jersey were coordinating meetups and group travel for days beforehand. That is not a fan base reacting to a big stage. That is a fan base that had already decided, independent of the stage. And the third thing is the strangest of all. 2 weeks before this match, at the Cincinnati Open, Eala had taken the first set against Amanda Anisimova, only to lose the match. Her recent form was real, but it was inconsistent, the kind of form that normally does not pull people out of hospital break rooms and onto a train at 6 in the morning. Fans do not usually travel for uncertainty. They travel for a coronation. So if they weren't showing up because she was a guaranteed winner, what exactly were they showing up for? Hold all three of those. Because right when they stop making sense is exactly the moment worth pausing on, and there is one more piece of this story that changes how every single one of those three questions gets answered. We'll get to it. But first, you need the number that breaks the old explanation completely. Here's the assumption almost every sports story runs on: a player wins, a fan base grows, the fan base shows up. Career first, crowd second. Under that assumption, this crowd is a mystery, because the career on paper wasn't yet big enough to explain what was happening on the ground. Now flip it. What if, in this one case, the crowd was never downstream of the career at all? What if the crowd was already there, geographically, culturally, for generations, just waiting for someone to point at? Because here is the number. The Asian American Federation's 2025 profile puts the Filipino population of New York City at roughly 94,000 people, up nearly 10% in 5 years, a faster growth rate than the city's Asian population overall. Zoom out to the wider New York, New Jersey metropolitan region, and census estimates place the Filipino community above 250,000 people. Nationally, the U.S. Census counted more than 4.6 million Americans identifying as Filipino in 2023, making them the third largest Asian origin population in the country. Now compare that to the number of Filipino players who had appeared in a U.S. Open main draw before this day, going all the way back to the start of the Open era in 1968. That number is 0. 0, for 57 years, from a national diaspora of over 4 million people. That is not a tennis statistic. That is a statistic about waiting. The demand had been sitting there for decades. The supply, until this Sunday, was 0. When demand that old finally meets its first unit of supply, of course the train is full. It would honestly be strange if it weren't. And here is proof that this isn't just a theory I'm building for you, it's something Eala says about herself, in her own words, all year, from Wimbledon to Toronto. She doesn't thank her fans. Listen to the actual word she reaches for, Kababayan. In Tagalog, that word doesn't mean fan base. It means countrymen, people who share your homeland. It's a word about kinship, not consumption. She isn't describing people she built an audience out of. She's describing people she was let back into. So now, finally, the match itself, because everything above was the setup for this 1 hour. Eala walks out to face Denmark's Clara Tauson, the 14th seed, a player she had never faced before in competition. On paper, this is the mismatch everyone expected. Eala drops the first set. She takes the second. And in the third, she falls behind 5-1, one game away from going home in straight sets, one game away from every person on that train getting off the 7 and heading back to Woodside with nothing to show for it. And then something happens that nobody in that stadium, and nobody watching from Manila to Jersey City, expected. She claws back game after game. The stadium gets louder with every hold. And she forces a third set tiebreak, down to the wire, before closing it out 6-3, 2-6, 7-6, becoming the first player in history from the Philippines to win a Grand Slam main draw match. 57 years of 0, ended in one tiebreak. After the match, she didn't talk about the ranking points. She said being Filipino was something she carried with pride, and that this community, here, made her feel like she was home. That's not the language of someone who thinks she built an audience. That's the language of someone who found her people. Now here's the part most retellings of this story leave out, and I think it's actually the most important part. 3 days later, in the second round, Eala lost to Spain's Cristina Buxa in straight sets. Her run at that US Open ended there. And that's exactly the detail that proves the whole reframe was right in the first place, because if the crowd had only ever been there for wins, the story would end on that loss. It didn't. The moment that mattered had already happened on day one, in that third set tiebreak, in that tunnel walk before the first serve when the cameras panned the stands and the flags were already there. The scoreboard afterward couldn't undo it, because it was never really about the scoreboard. That's the answer to the question I asked you at the start. She didn't build that crowd. She didn't earn it, not in the transactional sense fans usually mean. 250,000 people in the New York area, more than 4.5 million across the country, had been living full lives here for generations, nursing overnight shifts,